Hello, I'm Cheryl Jackson. Welcome to Your Voice. Many parents want their children to learn a second language. French immersion programs in Canada allow kids to do that. But a few schools give kids the opportunity to learn a third or even a fourth language, either during regular class time or in after-school programs, sometimes as early as age 3. What are the benefits of learning multiple languages? Does the process of learning a language actually change the brain? When is the best time to learn another language? And is there a risk? Can kids learn any language well if they learn too many? We have 3 guests who know about languages and learning to help us understand this. Ellen Bialystok is Distinguished Research Professor of Psychology at York University. She studies the effect of bilingualism on children's language and cognitive development. Laura Ann Petito is Professor of Psychology at the University of Toronto. Her research focuses on uncovering the biological mechanisms and environmental factors that determine how we acquire language and how language is organized in the brain. And Peter Gazzaloni is a teacher and administrator of the International Languages Program at Ryerson Community School, where kids learn English, French, and a third language of their choice. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here. Well, as an adult who has thought about learning another language, I find the idea very daunting, maybe a big commitment. How easy is it, Ellen, I'll start with you, for a child to learn another language?
There's this nice myth that everyone assumes is fact that goes something like this. Children learn languages automatically for free, then something happens to our brains and we're finished. Adults can no longer learn languages. And it's simply not true. Children are given the opportunity to learn languages in a way that supports every part of this very difficult task. It's all they do for the first 5 years. Everyone they interact with interacts with them for the purpose of helping them learn language. If adults had that opportunity, quit your job for 5 years. Here's a mentor who will speak to you at exactly the level you need and only talk about things that the mentor already knows you're thinking about, you would be very successful. But life doesn't give us that chance. So the main differences between learning languages as a child and as an adult are life.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense to me, actually, but it's not the way I've thought of it before. Laura Ann, what is happening in a child's brain when they're learning language?
That depends on when a child is exposed to language. If a child's exposed to 2 languages early in life, then they utilize the identical brain tissue that they would utilize if they were just learning 1 language. The same tissue that's involved in understanding and in producing a monolingual 1 language. However, if they are exposed to languages later in life, then different parts of the brain are involved, which is why you also have the sensation that it's a different type of task and it's a harder task. There's no question that if you're exposed to language, another language other than your native language, later in life, the brain distributes it across other tissue, calls in for help, pulls in other parts of the brain to accomplish that task.
Why does it do it that way? Why can't it learn it with in the same area of the brain later?
Interestingly, the part of the brain that's responsible for processing language is on a maturational timetable, and we know very clearly what that timetable is, when the periods are most sensitive. And it's not for all parts of language. There are some parts of language that remain open for life, like the vocabulary, and there are other parts of language that on a maturational timetable, our brain reaches a stable processing capacity and then stops because it's achieved its stable state.
So what age are we talking about here?
The different parts of language are affected differently by maturation. So early exposure is necessary for really good syntactic competence, for really good phonological competence. Early exposure is ideal. However, exposure later in life to vocabulary, which remains open for life,
Anytime.
Anytime.
Okay, well, that's good to know. Peter, now the kids at your school learn several languages. How does that work? Tell me how it works at your school.
So basically, Ryerson is one of 12 schools in the Toronto District School Board that offers integrated language program. And basically, they have a choice of a language that's determined based on demographics and with consultation with the school principal and the parent council of the language that will be offered. So at Ryerson, we have a great program that offers Arabic, Mandarin, Spanish, and of course African Heritage Program. So our students get to choose from one of these languages, and it's usually the language that they speak at home.
So they'll learn English. They're coming in with English.
Of
Do they
course.
learn French?
From grade 4 up onward, they learn French,
Right.
and the entire school from grade kindergarten up into grade 8, they actually do learn another language.
Wow, so they start that other language in kindergarten.
That's right.
Okay, and are they ready at that age? I mean, what do you see?
Oh, certainly. The program incorporates culture and tradition and in story writing and games and songs, so they get immersed right away. So your research probably will say that it's completely beneficial for them.
Okay, can you give me an example of what happens in a kindergarten class? Let's say
Absolutely.
Mandarin or African
Absolutely.
Heritage.
So
yeah.
the instructor will come into the class and they will start with a song or a story, and the kids will either read it in tandem with the teacher, or they'll sing a song together. So it's basically activity-based for the kindergarten students.
All right, and now you said that most of the kids learn languages, or they choose a language, or their parents choose the language, I guess, that
That's
they
right.
maybe speak at home or is in their culture somewhere. Do you ever get kids saying, or families saying, I want to learn something very different?
Oh yes, senior students mostly. They have a choice with their parents' permission to take another language. So for instance, if a student is in a Spanish class and they want to go into the African Heritage Program, they absolutely can. And the parents will sign a form, and they're happy to take any languages. So not necessarily the language that they want to learn, that they speak at home, is the language that they're taking at the school.
Okay, Ellen, how much exposure do kids have to a language to learn it?
That depends a lot, and that's really much more Laura's expertise than mine.
Okay.
Because in my research, I'm not so interested in this kind of abstraction called native speaker. So I'm interested in people learning a language to whatever level allows them to use it in a fluent and functional way, allows them to interact and make it a part of their linguistic repertoire, whether or not they sound like a native speaker or not. So the question about how much exposure is necessary depends entirely on what your goal is. Is it to just achieve enough fluency that you're a functional speaker, or is it to really acquire a native-like competence?
I can understand that. Well, what would you say, Laura Ann? I mean, if you're trying to have your child learn another language.
I think the most important factor is that the child be systematically exposed. The child doesn't have to have an enormous amount of exposure. So it's not, there's this notion that you have to have a lot of time in the second language, that it has to be equal in time to the exposure to your home language. So that's, for example, if you speak English in the home and you're learning Spanish, that the amount of exposure must be equal. Otherwise, you'll damage the child in some way. They won't have the same number of minutes, and so they won't have the same competence. But the human brain doesn't work on quantity, it works on quality. So it wants systematic exposure, regular exposure, with stable users across different contexts that are rich and varied, and the child will achieve language fluency. But it's not a matter of the number of minutes in French as compared to the number of minutes in English.
So is it enough then for a child to be taking a class at school,
Absolutely.
Maybe once every second day or whatever it might be?
Yes, as long as it's supported by staff and the community that gives the exposure in a very rich and varied way.
Right.
40 minutes in a classroom is not optimal to be utterly fluent, as many of us know who went through
Yes.
years of language immersion
Right.
classes.
Right.
But if it's rich and varied and supported with cultural material, linguistic material, movies,
Even within the school day?
Yes,
So it's not
yes.
something that parents have to look at
That's right.
supplementing outside the school day. Okay, that's
And that's
interesting.
exactly what we do at Ryerson. So they get 30 minutes of instruction a day with a maximum of 2.5 hours a week. So that immersion is definitely, they're exposed to it frequently,
And so can they, at what point do you see the children at your school being able to read and write in that other language that they've started learning in
I'm
kindergarten?
sure right away, right in kindergarten, they are printing. They're starting to print, characters or different words that the teacher is teaching them. So,
That's interesting. Ellen, do you think there are some kids that will have trouble learning another language? Like, is that true?
Well, I think that everything that we do with our minds, we have different abilities to do. Some of us can take piano lessons for 20 minutes a week and play Mozart, and some of us can never play Mozart. So everything we learn to do is distributed on a normal curve of ability and talent. And I believe language is like that. Now, what our minds are prepared to do is make everybody a competent speaker of a language that is in the environment almost with no additional effort. That kind of comes for free. But even within a monolingual community, there are a wide variety of verbal abilities. People are more verbal than others.
Sure.
And so people are more verbally talented than others. And when we say about someone, oh, well, he's so good at learning languages, there's something to it because it is something that is differentially distributed in the population. So indeed, with children, some will find this fun and exciting, and some will find it more effortful. But up to a basic level of competence, we are kind of guaranteed by our biology that we'll learn language.
Okay, Laura Ann?
Yes, I agree. We are guaranteed by our biology with basic competence in language and in multiple languages. I can promise you that the brain is not neurologically set to learn only one language. Imagine how silly that would be if you were going to be a creator of human beings and through evolutionary mechanisms we were only targeted to learn one language. That's not the case.
Right. How would your body ever know which one to pick?
That's right. So given our basic biology, if exposed early in life and systematically in a rich way, most typically developing children will jump in and learn the language.
But if children are exposed to several languages, how can they learn any one well, or does one language always dominate? What does that depend on?
Children develop preferences for languages that become dominant, and the preferences are set by various things outside of our biology, having to do with what language their friends are speaking, what language their parents are speaking. So it's sociolinguistically set. It's not set by human biology.
Right.
Human biology allows the child to extract patterns from the input, patterns in one language, patterns in another language, and to equally try to analyze and look for the patterns and generate new patterns based on what they heard. So yes, they will develop friendships, and those friends will have certain languages that will become dominant or not, but that's not a biological block or wall. That's a new thing that develops over time, is our need for social and kin and affiliation with groups.
Of course. Okay, that makes sense. We always like to hear from parents who may have a question or a comment about our show. This question came in from Stacy in Toronto, who has children in French immersion. I've noticed that kids who speak 2 or 3 languages, our cousins speak English at school, Portuguese with one parent, and Spanish with the other, seem a bit slower at building vocabulary, talking, and reading. I assume there's eventually a catch-up, but has this ever been proven?
Yes.
Well, that's an interesting question. Who would like, both of you would like
I've
to have
actually
something to
studied
say
this,
about
yeah.
this? Okay.
I actually have studied
Yeah.
it as well.
Yeah.
And
What have you found?
I also know that Laura and I have different answers. So
Okay, that's even more interesting.
there's 2 things to learning vocabulary. First, when the cognitive system kicks in and allows you to learn vocabulary. And that's what we call a milestone, when children begin producing words. And regardless of the environment in which the children is growing up, those milestones are constant. And that's, I think of that as sort of the cognitive mechanisms that are driving language learning. But how many words do they actually learn in each language? And here we have a lot of data now showing that for a long time, it is fewer than a monolingual speaker of each language. And we have data now extending into the early school years showing that on average, a monolingual speaker of English has a larger vocabulary than a bilingual classmate who also speaks something else at home. Is that something to worry about? Absolutely not, for the following reasons. First, that bilingual child knows at least as many words and probably more, and therefore at least as many concepts and probably more. Second, these are averages, and if you look at the distribution of the data, the vast majority of the two curves overlap. It means that most children are in this normal part of the curve where it could go either way. The bilingual could have a higher English vocabulary than the monolingual. But the third reason I think is most important, if you take these vocabulary tests that we use to assess vocabulary and divide them out, and we only give them in English, and you divide the words up into languages they're likely to encounter at home and languages words they're likely to encounter at home and words they're likely to encounter at school in English, there's no difference in English school vocabulary. So there's no academic risk, there's no compromise to the main purpose for which they learn English. It just means that home words and family words and traditional words, they may not know in English, which is not so bad.
Okay. Did you have anything to add to that then, Laura?
I actually agree, and what we're finding is that as Professor Bialystok said, often these tests are in English. If you look at the child's vocabulary in each of their languages and do that tally and then combine them, which is the most appropriate thing to do, that the overall average is identical to the overall average that a monolingual would have at that age.
Okay.
It just, you You would combine them. Also, just as a note, the human vocabulary, as we mentioned before, words and word meaning stays open in our capacity to learn for life. And it just makes sense. The word, microwave didn't exist 100 years ago. We have ways in which to take in new words. And so that's very vulnerable to environmental manipulation. So it doesn't concern us at a capacity level, a biological level, if we see differences in vocabulary.
Of course.
We'd start worrying if we saw differences in syntax and morphology and phonology, and we don't.
Okay. I'd like to talk for a minute about learning languages and achievement at school. Now, Peter, you see the kids all the time. Do you see any connection between their learning languages and their achievement in school?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's so much benefit from them learning another language at our school. And how often do I hear students even in the hallway say to me hi or bye in another language, or start a conversation or try to in another language with me? It's encouraging to the staff and our program as well. So it definitely has its benefits.
And do you see anything in terms of their marks? Or do you know?
Not specifically, I can't really say, but I think in general they're excited about learning a language, and then I think they could use it in the classroom as well.
Well, how does that spill over then, that excitement?
Well, they're encouraged to write more, some of them, or maybe make a game out of a language or out of a project. So their creativity basically is growing.
Oh, that's interesting. Do you see that in your research?
Definitely. We see advantages in children's higher cognitive and linguistic processing. But beyond that, we're finding fundamental advantages in their capacity to read. So reading in each language. In some extraordinary populations we've studied. We've studied in the United States in very under-resourced areas, extremely low socioeconomic status. We studied monolingual children in that environment, who then were sent to bilingual schools. And those children who were from monolingual English homes, when tested, in bilingual schools, when tested on reading performance, reading competence, the ability to segment the stream into phonetic units, they outperform children in the United States at the 95th percentile of excellence and academic achievement. So in one of the most remarkable findings that we've noted in our lab is that bilingual education is so powerful that it seems to be ameliorating the negative effect of low socioeconomic status. That's
Okay,
one
so
thing
are you
that's attracted a lot of attention right now.
Are you saying then that learning languages makes kids smarter?
That's a big term. There are a lot
I
of things
know.
that go into that.
I
And
know.
Professor Bialystok could talk to the cognitive benefits.
Sure.
But we have found, certainly if we circumscribe smart to mean linguistic processing and reading processing, we definitely see processing advantages clearly.
Okay, Ellen, what would you have to add to that? Does it make kids smarter?
Well, smarter.
I know that's a loaded word, but what are the cognitive benefits? What are the cognitive benefits? How does it spill over into other areas of their learning?
Okay, I'd like to contextualize it by pointing out something that maybe we lose track of. A generation ago, this conversation, or not even 20 years ago, 30 years ago, in this conversation, you would have been asking, is bilingualism making kids really stupid?
Yes.
Because that was where we were.
That was the view.
That
That
was where
was
we
it.
were. Exactly.
It confused, it delayed the children, made them linguistically incompetent.
What's changed?
Well, so for even for Peter to say, I think the kids may not be doing any better, but they're doing fine. This is revolutionary.
Yes.
And I think you have to keep track
Congratulations,
of,
Peter.
you have to keep track of the real seismic shift in attitudes that's brought us to the point where we can at least accept that it's not making them stupid. All right, let's raise the stakes. Is it making them smart? So this is what I study mostly. And again, smart, is a kind of a catch-all. But what we look at is very specific cognitive processes that underlie what it means to be smart. So we don't give them IQ tests, but we give them tests in the development of these really specialized abilities that are in the most expensive part of the brain. The front part of the brain develops last. It's a very highly evolved bit of brain structures. And it's the basis for everything that makes human thought unique. And what we find is, in broad terms, any sustained stimulating activity improves the development of those brain structures and mental functions. And bilingualism is one such activity.
Okay. Peter, if this appears to be such a good thing for children, and you've seen benefits at your school in terms of their confidence and creativity and even cultural benefits, right? Kids learning about each other. Why isn't it being offered in every school?
That's a hard question to answer. I mean, I think it's based on demographics, like I said earlier, and in consultation with the school's parent council. So we have a strong community and a strong parent voice, which we're very happy and proud of. So our school is one of the lucky 12 in our board to offer these language programs.
I think it also has something very deeply to do with Professor Baliak's observation of the seismic change that we're in right now. The view, we've always had a paradoxical view. In fact, we call it the bilingual paradox. We have this notion of bilingualism as this incredible, amazing thing. Children are like sponges. You throw them in the schoolyard and they learn the other language. However, when it comes down to educational policymakers and parents, there's often this fear that somehow multiple language exposure will cause a contamination. So I get parents coming to my lab who have fluently bilingual homes, Spanish, English, French, English, and the parents come in with these babies and say, oh, well, I'm speaking English to my child, and we've forbidden my husband to speak Spanish because it's going to contaminate the baby. And we're going to hold back until it's safe. Now, what's safe? Somehow when it's again this notion of, number of minutes on task, time on task. Give it much more English, you'll get established in a cognitive linguistic base, and then when it's safe, transfer over to letting them be exposed to this other contaminating force. Because somehow the fear is that there'll be linguistic confusion and delay. And again, the research has shown that's not true. And there's a lag time between research coming out of the laboratories and getting into policymakers' hands. Because there's mostly this view of the hold back policy.
Okay.
Stabilize in one and then introduce the other. And we're finding that actually that flies in the face of biology.
Okay.
The earlier the better.
Do you find this when you talk to parents, Ellen? Is this still a confusing thing? They don't know.
Well, they're certainly confused, but I get many, many emails from parents asking the question. And I find that encouraging because at least they're asking the
They're
question.
thinking about it.
Yeah.
Okay.
On a positive note,
Yes.
I think although our school board doesn't offer it to all the schools, it does offer it after school and to over 29,000 students. So there's 50 languages being learned in this program. So although maybe they don't have it systematically, there is a program out there that they can choose
Well,
from.
that's we're just about out of time, so I do want to ask each of you, and Peter, you've kind of led into this. What do you recommend then for parents? What would be your advice if they want their child to learn another language?
Certainly go
what
to
should
their
they do?
school, be a part of their school council, go to their principal, even contact our board office. At our school, we're having a kindergarten registration launch next Friday, January 29th. They can come and see our program, how it runs, and get involved, I would say, is the main thing, and encourage it.
Okay. Laura Ann, should parents seek out these opportunities?
I think that would be great, and I'd like to leave parents with the notion of don't be afraid. There's all this investment in baby Einstein projects and running out and to make your baby more smart, but just good old-fashioned learn another language and early exposure, systematic, and confidently. You're not going to hurt your baby's brain.
Okay. Ellen?
My motto is language is good, more language is better. So whatever language you can bring into your child's environment is beneficial. I would only add one thing we've just touched on but not discussed, and that's the importance of including literacy. Have books, storybooks in every language you can find. If you speak a little of some other language, have books, picture books, storybooks, so the child gets complete exposure to the language in both oral and written forms.
That's an interesting idea. I hadn't thought about that. So even if you don't speak a language, you could probably get a picture book with a few words you could
Yes.
pronounce.
Which we do offer as well for our students.
Children
Okay.
just pick it up as a game and start decoding the letters and seeing if they can figure out what it means.
Exactly.
Because not all parents have access or speak
Yeah.
other languages or have grandparents who do. Okay,
That's right.
Great advice. Thank you all. Very good. My guests have been Ellen Bialystok, Laura Ann Petito, and Peter Gazzaloni. If you'd like to know more, we've posted articles, research, links, polls, and blogs on our site. Just go to tvoparents.com, click on Your Voice. We've also listed our upcoming shows, so if you have a question for one of them, send it to us and we'll ask the experts. If you have a show idea, send that too. We want to hear from you. You can watch Your Voice every Sunday at 6 p.m. on TVO, and we are online anytime at tvoparents.com. I'm Cheryl Jackson. Thanks for watching.